everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullish Show. Today I have with me Jeremy Hurewitz. Now, Jeremy is an espionage expert, but he's not a spy, but he's been watching spies for years, apparently. So I'm going to hear more about that. And he's also a corporate intelligence agent who believes that real-life spies make the best business leaders and salespeople and business leaders. He's exploring why that's true in a new book releasing on August 27, Sell Like a Spy. In fact, August 27 was a day or two ago, apparently. So congratulations on the new book, Jeremy. A little bit more about Jeremy. He actually did a degree in English and philosophy and then went overseas and worked for the Project Syndicate out of Prague and Shanghai, which sounds quite exotic, really. And he spearheaded a business development strategy that saw the association grow from a few dozen member newspapers in mostly Eastern Europe to a truly global association with 300 newspapers in over 100 countries. So he can sell. During Jeremy's time abroad, he also works as a freelance journalist and regularly writes for Bloomberg, USA Today, and The Hill. When he got back to the USA, Jeremy settled into New York City, where he still is today, and worked for several known global consulting firms in the world of corporate security. And this where I think the journey started for Sell Like a Spy and how he learned about how to, I suppose, turn people into double agents, maybe not. So, Jeremy, welcome to the show. Congratulations on the new book, Sell Like a Spy. And I'm intrigued by the life journey that I've given a little thumbnail sketch in your bio. So you went to university. Let's go back to university. So you did English and philosophy. Was that because you love words, language? Where did that curiosity and that degree inspiration come from?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jeff, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's great to be with you. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely, I forget if it's left brain or right brain, but I am the one that is about words and ideas. And I do not do well with kind of math and, the hard sciences and all of that. So big reader, always been, somebody who likes to write. So English and writing were a big area of interest for me. So I naturally gravitated towards those areas and, had a wonderful experience in college learning all about literature and writing.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, words for me, I fell in love with them at the age of about 5 or 6 when I started consuming books. And and then I discovered that I liked words even better when I was about 50 and started a blog and started writing. So it only took me 50 years to work out what I was going to do with the rest of my life, but that's okay. So tell us a little bit about, so you went and worked for building a media association called Project Syndicate. Tell us a little bit about that. And you worked in Prague and Shanghai. How did you get that gig?
Yeah, well, after college, I just had kind of a, wanderlust. I wanted to go overseas. I wanted to be, I'm a musician as well. So I joke that I wanted to be some form of Ernest Hemingway meets Kurt Cobain. That was who I was at 22.
I can see that with the beard and the hair.
I'm still a very active musician, so maybe that's kind of, something. Anyway, I traveled around Europe with a backpack and a guitar. And I had a one-way ticket to Spain. It's the late 90s. And I eventually made my way to Prague, which was still going through this fantastic moment, unique in history that'll never be repeated, the 90s and, Eastern Europe. And in Prague, I think it was the center of all that. So it was just an amazing time to live in that city. Everything was really exciting. And honestly, I answered an ad in the Prague Post after being in the city for a few months, playing music in the cafes. And, at that moment in time, if you were a young Westerner with a college degree, they were like, you're our head of marketing, you're our head of sales. Because, the Czech Republic, those Eastern Europe, Central Europe states, they had, not a natural sense of kind of entrepreneurial kind of spirit in what they were doing. So Americans had a leg up in that way. And my dad is, I write about this in the book. My dad was a salesman, my grandfather. So, there's kind of natural salesmanship in my lineage. And, when the directors at Project Syndicate said, look, we really want to grow this organization. We want to be independent because we had money from, donors and nonprofits, and they wanted to maintain a nonprofit status, but to be independent financially. And that was my remit. And I'm proud to say that we achieved that by convincing these directors that I could go over and meet with sophisticated editors and talk with them about running the very unique opinion columns that we were commissioning. So that was my first experience with sales.
Right. So Project Syndicate, it was just an association that wrote serious copy for different newspapers. How did it work?
Yeah, it was two of the three directors were Polish emigres to the US academics. They wanted to help these newly liberated states in Eastern Europe and Central Asia transition to market planned economies. And the idea for Project Syndicate was to introduce kind of a dialogue between East and West. So, for instance, we brought, Václav Havel, who was the, president of the Czech Republic at that time. We would edit his speeches, turn them into op-eds, and they'd be featured in Le Monde or,
Yep.
Australian newspapers, so that came later, actually. And then we brought voices like Joseph Stiglitz and Jeffrey Sachs to audiences in Eastern Europe. So we fostered a global debate on international affairs that grew from a couple of columns per month to dozens every month with some of the most famous newspapers in the world.
Right. That would have been fascinating for you from a networking point of view, wouldn't it, in terms of meeting these, I suppose, academics and personalities and figures bigger than life. So that was there anyone that stuck out, well, any people that stuck out for you, personalities in that career?
Yeah, it's a great question. Two quick things. First of all, my director at Project Syndicate, who is an esteemed professor, just recently retired from Columbia, Professor Andrzej Rapaczynski, learned a ton from him about kind of humane leadership, how to be a great leader, how to believe in your people. So that he was a pivotal person. But I also think about Joseph Stiglitz, who's of course a Nobel Prize winner. He hadn't won the Nobel yet when I had spent some time with him. But I remember being a young man, and I had actually just been in Africa, and he was very curious about my thoughts on Zimbabwe, which was undergoing some very difficult times. And I remember just thinking, wow, this man who, there was whispers he was going to win a Nobel is kind of hanging on every word and everything I have to say. And that was really revelatory for me about, how intelligent people are looking for information from whatever source, and they're not beholden to their egos in that way. So that made a big impression on me. But as you noted, there were some incredible people I interacted with, and I grew so much from it.
Mm. So after that, you then moved a bit of freelance journalist, didn't you? So
well, it was kind of at the same time, Project Syndicate, because of that great leadership, I went to part-time after a number of years, and I was able to travel to, if I was going to Madrid and meeting with the editor at El País, as long as I made it clear that my freelance journalism was separate from Project Syndicate, they were happy to answer questions from me, and I got to, have some great sources and write at the same time.
Right. So you were having the time of your life.
Yes, I really did. It was a great experience.
Well, you told me too that you came to Australia and wrote a story on thresher sharks from the Philippines, and that was published in the Australian, which is one of our esteemed newspapers in Australia. So
and I had a blast in Australia.
Well, we've got some good beaches and some good sharks. So then you pivoted into corporate security. How did that happen? Was he just curious about that, or he needed to get a serious job, or how did that happen?
Maybe a little bit of both of that. Well, I came back from my, just under a decade abroad. I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in the suburbs, and wanted to live in the city. And the media was changing. It continues to change, obviously. And I was ready to make a change in my career. And people had mentioned this world of corporate security to me, and I've always been interested in the intelligence world. I definitely bumped up against Spies when I was overseas. I write about it in the book. We could talk about it. And this was an opportunity to get close to that world of intelligence, because I found out that there were a lot of former CIA case officers there, but also, an intriguing roster of others from elite government service, FBI, Department of Justice, Special Forces, all those things. And the book I've ultimately written is a synthesis of learnings from those various officials. But, to your question, I found that this kind of fit with my interests and my experience. Most people come from government that work in this world, but they do recruit former journalists, especially journalists that have had experience with some of the markets that I have had overseas, especially China, which everybody was interested in, especially in the late 2000s. The ability to write well, the ability to interact with people, to investigate, these were all skills that helped me get that job.
Right. So in that job, and also you've shown it, revealed in your book, what are some of the, I suppose, the skills of persuasion, in other words, to get people to bend to your way a little bit more, or to, what are some of the key skills, emotional intelligence and everything else? How would you describe the most important skills you would need in spycraft that leads into the world of persuasion and also selling? Tell us about what are some of the key elements that you really need to hone yourself on?
Yeah, well, you could get me rambling on for this for quite a while, but let me just think of a couple things. One of the things I lead off on almost every talk I give or training for sales teams is the idea of connection. And Jeff, you're an easy guy to talk to. I'm sure if we were sitting there in a bar in Sydney, we would quote unquote hit it off, and that's great. When that happens, we all enjoy that. But anybody in sales and anybody who is a spy or a journalist or in just about any other walk of life, even socially, sometimes you interact with people where you don't have instant rapport. And you don't want to give up on that easily. Maybe it's somebody you really need to get along with, or a potential client that you want to develop that rapport with. So that's where spies can really teach us a lot, because I call them the world's best salespeople, because their sale, which is convincing someone to buy into treason, is the hardest sale you could possibly make. So, spies are incredibly good at leveraging a variety of skills to get beyond that discomfort, because sure, spies meet people and sometimes they do hit it off, but because of their targets, they have to, oftentimes find a way to connect with people they would not otherwise spend time with. I'm talking about criminals, terrorists, diplomats from some places that are, authoritarian, really bad countries, and they need to cultivate these people. So they use a variety of different things. Radical empathy, which is looking for that kernel of humanity that's there in just about any person. The terrorist who's you think of as a monster, but actually is a very charitable person. They'll focus on that. They think about intellectual curiosity. So the idea is, if you introduce yourself to me and you're a rural guy and you're into hunting, and I'm a product of an urban environment and I have never hunted, I don't just blow that off, and I don't pretend that I've hunted before. I get interested in that subject. And the CIA and other intelligence agencies focus on recruiting people who have that natural intellectual curiosity, people who have the ability to get people to open up. And then one of the things that is, I have a personal story about it, but I really believe in, is about vulnerability. Spies are really good at, when they need to, making themselves vulnerable, sharing something about themselves. They're not always putting on an act. One spy told me about having a child on the autism spectrum, and in his posting in the variety of places in the Middle East where family is talked about quite a bit, he, on more than one occasion, met, somebody that he was trying to cultivate who also has a challenge with a child like that. And what happens, Jeff, when you make yourself vulnerable, when you open yourself up to somebody, they typically respond in kind. We have a tendency to share something back. And, that what I always say to people is that we relate in that way, because while not everybody has experienced tragedy, we all experience misfortune. And so that we tend to sort of share something about ourselves when we make ourselves vulnerable. So spies wrap up all of these things, along with just kind of a natural personality of being likable, and they're able to connect deeply with people. And I haven't even said anything about active listening, which I call the most important skill that any spy could have, but we can get to that.
Yeah. Well, let's pivot straight into that, actually, because active listening is powerful listening. And I grew up in a home with a loving father and mother, but my dad was very, very good at talking, but shit at listening.
A lot of men are, in particular. Women are usually better.
So I made a promise to myself not to be like my dad in that way. And in my 20s, I went along to a 6-month course, which is a part of a counseling course, and it was a listening course, active listening. So And it changed my life. And I was in the middle of I was developing as a salesperson in the tech industry at the time, because I did enjoy sales, because I was originally a teacher. But for me, the ability to actually listen actively, ask the right questions, be interested, and also to reflect back what you're feeling or what you're sensing with that person as well. It was the best 6 months of my life in terms of a skill that I knew I needed. I'd gone through a marriage breakup as well, so I said maybe I need to be a little bit better listener.
Mm-hmm.
But tell us a little bit about the power of listening that you've discovered through, basically espionage and that. Tell us a little bit about what you think are some of the most important skills to be a great listener, in fact, a great communicator as well. I'd be interested in what your
Absolutely.
thoughts are.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things to know about active listening, and maybe you already know this, we're hardwired in our evolutionary sense to not be good active listeners, unfortunately. So it's something we have to overcome, and you have to commit yourself, as I describe it, to cultivating an active listening practice. It's not, there's no, trick I can teach you. You have to, there's a variety of things to think about, because in our evolutionary trait, when we were, primitive man on the savannah, we learned to communicate in short clips so that we could keep our attention focused on what's in front of us, so that we weren't either eaten by something or that we could eat something if we saw an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way listening and comprehension developed. And to this day, nearly all of us listen with an intention to reply, not an intention to truly listen. We tend to, think about what somebody's saying for just a moment. We get the gist of it, and then we go back into our mind and think about our interesting reply. And there are other challenges. The mind works about 4 times faster than our ability to speak. So a lot of people have had the situation in a conversation where you're saying something and the person's nodding. You can see from their body language, they know where you're going. They almost finish your sentence for you. And they get impatient because the mind works faster than our ability to speak. So we have all of these hurdles, and overcoming them are so hard. The other one that's an interesting comparison is I think about it as kind of like the melody and the lyrics in a song, because when you're talking, you sometimes get it's been described as 90% of our comprehension is body language and tone of voice. Some people say it varies the amount, and only 10% of the words. It varies based on the person, all these different details. But most people agree that it's hugely weighed towards the general side of things and not the actual words. And I compare it to, like, when you're listening to a song, you might only know the chorus, or you might only know a few songs, but you understand the emotional meaning of the song through the melody, and conversations like that too. So understanding those things is a first step towards becoming a better active listener. And then it's about asking clarification questions, putting aside the interesting anecdote you want to tell, and getting that person to speak more. Because when we feel listened to, we feel respected. And I often ask audiences to, pause for a minute, close your eyes, and think about the best listener you've ever experienced. And I say, don't you have a very high opinion of that person? And, I've never had anybody say no, because your best listener is somebody that you cherish. So you can be that best listener. And then we get into, like Bill Clinton and his unique ability to make that person feel like whoever he's talking to is the most important person in the room.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack there, but that's kind of a start of how I describe it.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's the art of listening. I'm calling it deep listening, to hear a person, to feel a person. And I can't remember the name of the book, but I read a book recently which got into the art of one of the skills, and I started applying it a bit, is actually asking people their story. How did you start? And here we are on a podcast, and I've asked you your story. And for me, I find it fascinating to what inspired you? Where did you come from? And I did it at a dinner party once, or was in a restaurant celebrating the 25th anniversary of a restaurant, and an artist. And I chatted to this lovely lady who was in her 70s. She'd lost her husband 2 years before, and I got to talking, and I heard her whole life story, from where it started in Melbourne, the marriage breakup, that she got into being a fashion designer. And it was just because it's not just about the words, it's about, so you are feeling and sensing them by hearing watching their eyes. I think communicating, looking at the color of their eyes is one thing I like to do. What is the color of their eyes? I want to look into their eyes because it's the gateway to the soul. And yeah, I just started asking people, well, what's your story? And not on a podcast, but just generally, because then
Mhm.
you've got context. And yeah, I'm fascinated by, in fact, I've written the outline for a book on listening, so I'm just trying to work out the angle for it. But
Not cool.
it listening, active listening, but it's more than active, it's actually listening with empathy, it's sensing, isn't it? All of that.
Absolutely. Everything flows from listening,
Mm.
everything from hostage negotiation to sales to everything flows from listening. If you listen well, it can unlock so many things for you.
Yeah. And it even applies to dating. And that's actually,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I'm on a
And
mission to sort of get men to be quiet a little bit more and be better listeners. I think female friends would be grateful for that, so I can get men to just shut up and and listen more.
yeah. And it's really it, it it was interesting. I was playing around of golf with a friend of mine, and she's saying she's got a good friend of hers that's in his 40s, and he's having trouble, getting relationships right or getting
Mm.
into a relationship. And I said, does he talk a lot? She said, yes. I said, okay.
Yeah, there you go.
If he changed one thing, if he listened, a lot of women would find him very attractive.
We had a very similar situation. My wife shared that a mutual friend bought the book, and he's a very successful doctor. He's a good-looking guy, but he's not a great listener, and he talks too much. And he already flagged in the book. He said, "Oh, I could learn from this chapter." And we both looked at each other like, "Yep, you really could."
Yeah, so you're right. It goes into almost every corner of our lives as humans, the art of active listening. And so I think, there's two words I rather like, I think, as humans, to be attractive is to be interested and interesting.
Yep, completely
So,
agree.
yeah, and that is because that if you're interested in someone and you are able to ask some questions, and I think the other word you mentioned, which I totally agree with, is the power of vulnerability. And I find one of the books that really brought it to light for me was Brene Brown, I think is the speaker, and she speaks about the power of vulnerability. And because a lot of us, as men especially, we want to look strong. We don't want to look weak. And if you
Right.
reveal something to someone that makes you look weak, then you think that is weakness. In fact, I think there's incredible power and strength in being vulnerable.
Yeah, and I think it's Allen Ginsberg, the poet, that said, "Reveal everything, and then they have nothing on you." And I always remembered that because I've always been a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve, and that's why, as I describe it in the book, like I never worked for the government, but I've been a pretty good corporate spy. But I'm good at keeping other people's secrets and less about my own. So it would have been harder to be a government spy in that way. But I've always been comfortable with sharing, details about myself. I don't buy into the sort of male stoicism, and you have to,
No.
so I think being vulnerable is a great way to connect with people. I don't think I know it. I've seen it over and over again through situations in my life. Again, I describe it quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, the one thing you did mention was that if you are willing to be vulnerable, then it'll be matched a lot of times by the person you're talking to. They go, oh, he's willing to be vulnerable, or they're willing to be vulnerable. I'll share a little bit about me. But the
Absolutely.
whole male stoicism thing is certainly it's a major issue. And that then leads to, you know, men suffering mental illness maybe a little bit more because of that. They're not willing to open up and share. And
Right.
so when you work in corporate security and you came across, and then what are some fascinating stories that you experienced in that career that you learned from? Like, were you didn't become a spy, of course, but in terms of what were some of the biggest observations you made along the way in that career in corporate security and the art of spycraft? What are some interesting stories that you remember?
So stories about like colorful cases we worked on,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
more the
yeah.
Sure. Well, one of my favorite wild stories, I have a lot of China stories because I'm a China guy, and China's wholesale industrial theft of Western businesses' intellectual property was something we worked on closely, and it was it remains something I still think and focus on a bit through my work. But with the most extreme case we worked on was, and I have a spy novel that I finished that'll hopefully come out in the near future. But I write about this in the book. We had a hedge fund that was going to short a company. I can now mention the company because I think they've been delisted. They were called Real Gold. They were listed on the Hong Kong exchange. And this was during a wave of hedge funds shorting every Chinese stock they could get their hands on because they realized that there was lack of corporate governance structures and they were making stuff up. So we got to work on this company. We did, any good investigation starts with the public records. So we did public records research. We found a Byzantine structure, offshore this and that, lots of red flags. But when we got into the human intelligence and sent, an agent to the mines in Inner Mongolia, we found some
Wow.
extraordinary things. There were supposedly three mines that Real Gold was mining gold from, and one was producing gold, but the other two were a sham. One was flooded with water, the other was basically empty, aside from a sleepy guard. But then, and we took photos of that. You were able to show that. The operative was great. He took photos of the track leading to one of the, non-existent mines, and he could show weeds growing out of the ground. So no heavy machinery had been through in quite a while. But when the guy went down to the mines, to the village, the villagers were like, "Oh yeah, that mine. The Real Gold paid us to go up there and pretend like we were working, and a bunch of white men in suits came to watch us." So it was the banker roadshow. They faked the mines
Wow.
being productive in order to get a boost in the IPO. So this was solid gold for our client. They were able to short the stock. They went public with it, and the company was delisted, and our client made millions.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to find the truth quite often, isn't it? Especially when it's buried literally in a mine on the other side of the world.
It is, but I think the key thing is to know how to ask the right questions and put yourself in the right situation. So a lot of the work that I focus on is reputational due diligence. People call them background checks. And, we find that people are a penny wise and a pound foolish. You can get a private equity firm that's making $100 million investment, and then they're desperate to save $1,000 on this kind of investigation. But, we say, look, if you're going to keep the CEO and this $100 million investment, you might have played golf with him, you might have called a few references, but if you want to let us do our thing, we'll tell you a lot more about him. We'll do things like, we'll get into his country club where he plays tennis regularly, and we'll watch him play, and we'll find out, does he smash his racket like a baby and storm off the court if he loses, or is he graceful, and socially amiable, even in difficult moments like that? And, smart investors know that means a lot about how you deal with somebody under stress and what their personality is like. So these kinds of insights are there and they're available. You just have to know the right buttons to push and how to make them happen.
Yeah, maybe playing a round of golf with someone can be very, very revealing.
It can, but if you're, the private equity investor and you're playing with this CEO, that guy is going to have his, or that woman's going to have their best face on, right? They're
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
be there,
yeah,
they're not going to reveal their true self. It's having someone like me as an operative speak with a former litigation foe or someone who worked with them 5 years ago or someone who serves on a board with them and get them through the methods I write about in the book to by elicitation, by asking questions in the right sequence, by asking more encouraging questions to get them to open up and say things about somebody they might not otherwise reveal. So there's real tradecraft that goes into that.
yeah. So you must have a very honed sense of skepticism, um, based upon your history working in that area, wouldn't you? Like you're looking for red flags, those sort of things. Like you said, it's Byzantine type structure. Everything's offshore, but so have you honed your sense of, I suppose, healthy skepticism is maybe the best way to describe it over the years? Is that something that you've worked on in terms of you're trying to find the truth? Um,
I tend to believe people. So I have had to sort of train myself to be a little bit more skeptical, frankly, Jeff.
yeah,
I think I've gotten there. Maybe I've seen too much and all of that. But yeah, And then usually if I'm doing one of these investigations, and I work with a corporate intelligence firm called Intrafor International, and I do a lot of the human intelligence gathering that I'm describing to you. I'm a strategic advisor to this firm. And usually I have some marching orders from the client. Maybe there's a red flag they want to know about something. Maybe that red flag only comes up after we've done the public records research and we find they had two DWIs, driving while intoxicated, 5 years ago. And so you might want to drill down on certain facts. So I usually have an assignment about some things I want to look into. And I listen to how people talk about things, and I listen to what they don't say, and I listen to how they say it. And I start to, factor those things in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think being a good listener is actually working out, just like you just said then, it's like, what are they not saying? That can be actually a real revealer of the truth, because what are they leaving out here? And they shouldn't be leaving this out here.
Absolutely. And then there's all of the details on detecting deception. And there's a whole section about that in the book about, you can't, a lot of people who are former CIA, FBI are going around to corporate types and saying, I can make you a human lie detector. And that's not true. Like, nobody can, tell you if someone's lying with a great degree of certainty. Humans are too varied. Even a polygraph isn't, always true. So, but you can find patterns of behavior that people exhibit, and you can take that as a red flag, not an indication they're definitely lying, but they might be anxious, they might be being deceptive. So there are things that you can learn in conversation to keep in mind about someone being potentially deceptive, and body language will reveal that as well too sometimes.
Yeah, that was the next question I was going to ask, because I was thinking while you were talking. So and so tell us a bit about body language, because when I was working in sales, it's certainly there's different tactics you use to open people up physically, which then allows them to be more open in conversation. Like, if someone's sitting like their arms like that at a meeting, you're going, I've got to change this body language. Any top tips about body language, basically in persuasion and also detection? Any tips you can reveal about body language that you've learned over the years?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing similar with deception, I'm skeptical of anybody who says one movement in body language means this one thing, So
Yeah.
yes, when you fold your arms, it's considered a blocking behavior. Anything that someone puts in front of you themselves, between you and them, they're indicating blocking behavior. So if you're at a business meeting and someone is, setting up in front of you and they put things between you, their water bottle, that's something where they're trying to establish distance. Conversely, if you're maybe on a date, as we were talking about, these skills are useful in everyday life, and your date comes and you're sitting down and there's a napkin folded there, and they remove the napkin, they clear a path with the water glass and the salt and pepper, that's an opposite of a blocking behavior. They want to be very open. But what I tell people, and just the quick answer, I think, is establish a baseline behavior. You sit down with somebody in a room. What are they like? Are they talking with a lot of body language? Are they very calm? Do they, what are they exhibiting? And then when you start talking, if you say mention price and they start rubbing their neck, or they start rubbing their legs or licking their lips, these are soothing gestures. And you can look up, there are a variety of soothing gestures. So when they break from that baseline, you can know that, hey, I might be making them anxious, and maybe one other quick thing, always remember when you're talking with somebody that their body language will tell you how they feel. And in particular, the feet are very revelatory. So if you're standing talking with somebody and their feet are pointed away from you, they want to exit the conversation. But somebody with their feet pointed directly at you, you can consider as more engaged and directly speaking with you.
Yeah, I find it when I was doing face-to-face sales, large scale selling, in other words, selling big deals. It was fun, because you're trying to sense them, you're watching them, you're seeing their body language, and you're trying to work out what's really going on. Are you just being, in other words, it's between you and another bidder, for example, to get their business. And so it's like a chess game, isn't it, really, in terms of trying to unearth their objections, because they quite often won't tell you. So let's go to objections then. So in terms of, how do you remove those objections in selling and persuasion, so that they will, how do you, one, unearth them, and then how do you actually solve them? I'd be interested in your insights on objections, because that's a big part of selling, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I have less to say on how to overcome the objection because they're all going to be so unique. You know, I work with clients directly on doing that, but I have to dig in on what the objections might be, and then we can work on it. But what I can speak about more is unearthing those objections through one of the more popular skills that I teach, which is elicitation. And elicitation is, you know, a way to collect information in a more circumspect manner, and it leverages behavioral science. So, you know, for instance, if you have a client, and I've done a lot of kind of consultative retainer-based sales for a lot of money, you know, 6-7 figure annual retainers. And when we would try to renew those retainers, you would, you know, worry about whether, you know, they're up for that. And sometimes you have less than ideal information about how the client is perceiving you and using your service. And if they're a private company, how they're doing in the market. So, you know, you might call up your client and say, you know, hey, Jeff, I heard a rumor. I'm not sure if it's true. I heard the company's struggling. I'm hearing about like layoffs. I'm hearing like budget cuts. Like I was disturbed by that. So I wanted to just give you a ring. And what you're going to find there is that tendency to correct is going to come up. People don't leave things. If I say, Jeff, isn't your favorite color blue? You're not going to say, no, it's not blue. You're going to tell me what your favorite color is, because we're all vain in a certain way and we're the stars of our own universe. We're going to tell you something about ourselves that you might not have gotten wrong. So you're proud of your business and you're going to tell me, no, Jeremy, you got that backwards. We're actually doing really well. And so that tendency to correct is at work, and also professional pride. You know, I might not be a good friend, but I'm somebody they're acquainted with professionally. So they're going to want to do a little bit of bragging about how they're doing. So those are two examples about how you might unearth an objection. In this case, it could be, hey, your fees are too high. And I'm trying to get ahead of that with our renewal discussion, which is planned a month from now, you know, and I'm going to want to sit down with you and I'm going to want to know ahead of time, hey, do I have some headwinds because your business is struggling, or, you know, a variety of things. So by doing what I just did, I was able to close that information gap and unearth any objection that might come up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really the art of communication and unearthing, you know, information is sometimes it's the art of being quite tentative in terms of asking a question. What I'm sensing is that, tell me if you're right, when you did it actually, when you're talking about that, is that, you know, look, I've sort of sensed as maybe you're not quite happy with the situation. Am I right or am I wrong? Or, and then if they go, absolutely, I am, you know, nervous or whatever they reveal then. But the art of being tentative is basically also important part of listening, in that you're trying to be gentle in the communication in terms of trying to get them to open up, and I sense that you might be feeling this way about that, and they go, and then you get them to say yes or no, or go, you're not quite getting me. So you get absolutely is a big word that's used if you actually have got the message. Then you've got the other one going, well, not quite. So it's trying to dig deeper, isn't it, really, to actually unearth the truth. And then, so, because you've got to operate from that to actually be able to persuade or to understand first.
Absolutely. And one of the way you're describing it makes me think about another element of tradecraft that I call the stumbling ask. So the idea here is, if I say to you, hey, Jeff, you know, I was thinking maybe you could help me out with something. You know what? I don't want to kind of cloud our friendship with this request. Let's just put it aside from now. But now you go, whoa, wait a minute, Jeremy. You know, what's this about? You know, what's going on here? No, I want to leave it. And then I say, look, you know, could you introduce me to your colleague on this other team? But I don't understand why she's not taking my calls, but I want to speak to her. And then you go, yeah, no problem. I'll make sure I go talk to her over there. And then you'll follow up with me and say, did she respond to your email? Now you're a part of it because you insisted on knowing it. And spies do this. Spies get somebody involved, and they accomplish two things by using this method. Number one, they get someone to do something they're trying to do, right? Get them to move forward there. But they also get to confess their friendship and how they don't want to kind of cloud things by doing that. So I think it's a really canny way to get someone on board with something you're trying to achieve and making them seem like it was their idea.
Yeah. Yeah, once you've got them to think it's their idea, then you've almost got them.
Exactly.
But I like that. Also, you're tapping into a sense of curiosity. They're going, oh,
What could this be?
what were you going to say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. These human tendencies, they're ripe for using to, convince people to connect and influence.
Yeah. So the other thing I'm curious about, and we need to wrap it up because you've got to go and cook a meal for your beautiful wife, apparently, which is great. So in terms of the process of writing the book, I'm always intrigued because I have written a book, Blogging the Smart Way, which is about it was about 120 pages. So, but I haven't. A lot of books we are written today got to meet a certain number of pages, like 220 or 320 or something, and quite often basically authors have to fill up that many pages. So you're going, you could have told me this in 50 pages, or you could have done it in 100 pages, for example. So, but we're still seeing lots of books that are 300 plus. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the art of writing this book, some of the struggles and the joys of doing this, because writing a book is a big job.
Yeah, it is. And I've written a couple that haven't been published now. There's some that are, which is great. And I hope that continues. What I can say, I'm a fast writer, so I work quickly. Writing Sell Like a Spy was interesting because I had been working on it for a few years already, right? Talking to people, writing articles, doing free talks, building up the brand with it, and building the intellectual property and building up what I'm doing with it. So I had been working on it in some ways for a couple of years. But by the time I got the book deal, I got an agent, I got a book deal, and I kind of knew the program more or less where I wanted to go. So the principal writing just took a couple months because I had been working on the framework for it for a couple of years, So that combined with the fact that I just am a fast writer, maybe it's the journalism background or whatever, writing on deadline and all that.
Yes.
It was a joy, and I love to write, and I want to write nonfiction and fiction, and I hope that people want to read it because I just love the process of writing, letting my thoughts come out on the page about something I know and I'm passionate about and care about. To me, it's one of the greatest joys in life.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that I do every day. I actually have a journal, which
it's a great thing.
Yeah, and distill, what I feel or sense or have experienced the last day. We're up to about 650 pages so far, but it's really been good to do that. The other thing I love about writing too is I write to learn. In other words, and I love Stephen King's quote. He says, if you want to write, you need to read. There is no other way. In other words, inspiration doesn't come out of a vacuum. You need to be an avid reader, and I love reading, luckily. So it's not something it was something I was born with innately, which I'm so glad for that gift. And also an encouraging mother that wanted me to read and corrected my grammar because she was a secretary. She even did shorthand. So
And Jeff, what I would also add too, in terms of writing, is note taking is something I'm pretty passionate about, and I write about that in the book because I think it's a big blind spot in the business world. I don't think the business community does good with note taking. So, and spies are really good at note taking. They have to file contact reports after every meeting with an agent. There's an extensive process of building a dossier on a target agent if they determine somebody is to go after. So, having that kind of ability to write and download quickly and collect, the atmosphere that I also write about, I think that influences sales is something I think is really important to learn.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I used to carry around notebooks or a little notebook with me, but since the rise of the smartphone, I use my notes app more than any other app on my phone, and
I use it all the time too. Yeah.
So I might be walking down to the beach here, and I have a thought, and I'm going, I'll actually stop and actually put it into my notes. And what I love about notes too is I can share it with myself via email as well. I can have it on my computer. I can cut and paste that later to add to, like, it might be a story, it might be a quote. But I think being an active note taker, like you said, is just absolutely vital. And I do a bit of meditation, even known to stop myself during a meditation and write something down that popped up, that floated through my consciousness.
There you go.
Yeah. So, yeah. Jeremy, I'm going to ask you one more question to wrap it up. I ask all my guests is, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do every day that brings you deep joy and happiness?
Well, music is a huge part of my life. I'm a musician. I think if I had a ton of money, I'd start a little record label and I would curate it and put out music by people I think are underserved in terms of they should have a broader audience, and I'd promote it. And I'd put out beautiful vinyl editions of the records. And that's what I would do with a ton of money. I think my wife would say, let's get a beach house, and I would like to do that as well. But for this answer, I'd say let's do a record label and put out some great music.
Great answer. Thank you very much for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Jeremy, it's been an absolute pleasure and a joy to sit down with you for nearly an hour and hear your stories, and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you very much. And we'll have this up in the next few weeks, and we'll let you know about when this podcast goes live and the team. So thank you very much. It's been a blast.
Thank you so
absolute
much.
Joy.
I hope your readers check out Sell Like a Spy. And if they want to find me, they can find me on selllikeaspy.net is my website, and LinkedIn and all of that. And I really appreciate you having me, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeremy.